Recognizing the member for Burnaby Deer Lake.
Thank you. Thank you, Honourable Speaker, and it gives me a pleasure, I guess, pleasure to speak on this bill, but I'm disappointed that I have to speak very negatively about it. This is a bad bill for British Columbia. It's a particularly bad bill in that we are, with Bill 24, we are essentially dismantling, or at least partially dismantling, the Agricultural Land Reserve, which has served this province very well for over 40 years. And it's really difficult to be a part of history that is so unfortunate. So it is with very mixed feelings I get up and speak, but I am going to do my bit to try to convince the members on the other side of the House that this is a bad bill, and I'm glad that I'm glad that some of the company across the way, I can't mention individual members, but I am pleased that I get a chance to speak when some members are in the House that I hope will listen. And so many of us have been speaking so passionately on this side of the House about the importance of the Agricultural Land Reserve. And I don't believe that that all the members on the other side of the House, in their heart of hearts, are supportive of being the ones whose legacy, of being the party whose legacy is going to be taking away the preservation and the protection of farmland in British Columbia that all parties have supported and continue to support over the last 40 years, because all parties, even those that may originally have spoken against many years ago the Agricultural Land Reserve, when it came down to it, all parties have respected that this is an institution, that this is a program that is working for British Columbians, that it is in fact effectively preserving farmland, and that it needs to continue to be protected. Until now. It's very unfortunate. So what does Bill 24 actually do? It dismantles, or I said partially dismantles, the Agricultural Land Reserve, which has done what it was designed to do since it was created back in 1973 by an NDP government, and that is to protect farmland from development. And the thing we have to remember about farmland is you don't get to take it back and forth. That once a piece of property is paved over, once a development has gone in, once the subdivision is there, it is gone. Once it is gone, it is gone. Now I know that we can in some cases, there is the ability to rehabilitate land, but it's very limited how we can rehabilitate land, and for the most part, once it's gone, it's gone. So how is this bill dismantling the Agricultural Land Reserve? Well, what's happened with this BC Liberal bill is that there's two things that are going to lead to the dismantling of the Agricultural Land Reserve. First of all, and the biggest thing, is that the province will be divided into two zones. Zone 1, the Lower Mainland, where I live. I represent Burnaby Deer Lake, so it is wonderful to see. It's wonderful to see students from Burnaby who've just been introduced. One more wave. Thank you for coming. So the province is going to be divided, as I said, into two zones. The first zone includes the South Coast, Vancouver Island, and the Okanagan. And the sweeping changes will not happen in those zones, and that's important, but it is also vulnerable. Zone 1 is also vulnerable for different reasons. But Zone 2 contains 90% of the ALR. It is all of the province other than the South Coast and the Okanagan and Vancouver Island, as mentioned. Contains 90% of agricultural lands, and in that 90% of the province, the Agricultural Land Commission will be compelled, is forced not to prioritize farming within the agricultural land reserve, with those areas that are within the agricultural land reserve, but is forced to give equal weight to economic, cultural, and social values, regional planning objectives, and, quote, any other prescribed considerations. And it always concerns me, or it often concerns me, that we have bill after bill after bill coming into this House, laws coming in to be debated, which have large parts of them that we essentially can't debate because it's something that will be decided in the future. It'll be decided behind closed doors by cabinets. So when it says any other prescribed considerations, this means that cabinet behind closed doors gets to write regulations and say what other considerations have to be considered by the Commission when somebody is trying to get land out of the agricultural land reserve. And we have no idea what that is. I mean, it could be that as consideration, if a pipeline is coming through this area, then that has to be a priority, or that needs to be a priority. We don't know. It could be anything. I'm not saying that that's going to happen. But when you compare what has been the priority for the last 41 years, that farming and food security will be the primary consideration, and you replace it with these other things, including a bunch of priorities that we have no idea what they are because it's not in the legislation, it concerns me. And those changes there's no doubt that what the result of this is going to be, the obvious result is going to be that there will be far more exclusions, far more land taken out of the agricultural land reserve in this province. The other thing that Bill 24 does, which concerns me, is it shifts decisions away, key decisions with regard to exclusions and with regard to land in the ALR. It shifts it away from the Commission, which has been independent and has made decisions over the years on the basis of what is best for farming and farmland in British Columbia. It has been insulated from local pressures and had as a priority and has had as its modus operandi is to preserve farmland in the province. And now what's going to happen is that there will be 6 panels that are going to be populated by Liberal government appointees who will be responsible for making the decisions about what land comes out of the agricultural land reserve in across the province. That's in both Zone 1 and Zone 2. And, you know, it really concerns me because those individuals, number one, they are political. They will be political appointments. So we're taking the decisions away from an independent commission, and they will be political decisions that are made. And in addition, those local panel members will be under a great deal more pressure and will not have the insulation that the Commission does. They will be under pressure from those that are making applications. And it really concerns me that is going to happen. You know, and the tension with regard to agricultural land is a natural one, because what's happened over the years of development in British Columbia is that population growth has generally been in the prime farmland area, because that's where populations grew. It was what we did when we were forming as a country. People came, and for the most part came for resource development, for farming, for fishing, for certainly the forest industry was huge, and the coal mining industry was huge as well. But a large part of the reason for population growing in much of the province had to do with the fact that there was good farmlands. So it creates a natural tension, and the place that has had the most growth, the Lower Mainland, where I live, there has been a tremendous tension. And it was because of that tension and the fact that thousands and thousands of acres were being removed from agriculture to sprawling development in the lower mainland, and the fact that we were losing prime farmland. That is the reason that the Agricultural Land Reserve was created by the NDP government in 1973. There was a recognition that we needed to preserve the land. And I wanted to say that I appreciate a background paper that I read that was done by Emily Yearwood Lee, a reference librarian. I believe she still is. I still see Emily, I believe, up in our wonderful legislative library here in the legislature. And she did a history of the Agricultural Land Reserve back in 2006, updated in 2008. And as she pointed out in her history, only a small fraction of British Columbia's land is considered arable, and an even smaller proportion of the soil is rated top quality. Historically, British Columbians have settled near that prime soil in valley bottoms or in river deltas. But what happened, at the end of that quote, but what she points out is that after the Second World War, there was rapid expansion, housing and industrial expansion in BC, and that started to prompt concerns about the loss of valuable farmland. And she also points out that it was estimated that between 4,000 and 6,000 hectares of arable BC soil were lost yearly prior to 1972 to non-farming purposes. She also points out in this history how it was all parties recognized in the run-up to the Agricultural Land Reserve being formed in 1973. All parties expressed concerns about the loss of farmland and realized that we needed to do something. There may not have been agreement, but that we needed to do something. And I'm proud that it was our party that when we were elected in 1972, that we created the Agricultural Land Reserve. And I think it's been seen as a legacy, as a real as a real highlight for this province, made it somewhat unique, although certainly similar laws have been brought in other provinces and other parts of the world. It was certainly seen as visionary at the time. It was visionary, and it worked. And you know, it was interesting that when they were bringing the Agricultural Land Reserve, after the announcement that there was going to be a freeze, after the announcement that there was going to be an Agricultural Land Reserve or legislation brought to protect farming, there was a frenzy of speculation, and so then there had to be a freeze on the sale of those farmlands. And I mention that now because it's interesting. I've heard from many different sources, friends in the development community, and from all sorts of different sources, that exactly the same thing is now happening, that there is rampant speculation of land that is presently within the Agricultural Land Reserve. And you know what? Speculators, people who are investing in property, only do it, if they're not doing it for farming, they're only doing it because they believe they're going to make a ton of money, make a bunch of money by investing now. And so there's a real confidence there's a real confidence that, in fact, I understand that land is going to be much easier to remove from the Agricultural Land Reserve, and so the investments come. And that's not good for farming in British Columbia. It's very unfortunate for farming in British Columbia. I would also note that the commission, the first Agricultural Land Commission, set up headquarters in long, narrow office in Burnaby, my community, and fondly dubbed the Yellow Submarine by staff. And the Agricultural Land Commission headquarters continues, I believe, to be in Burnaby, just across the street from the edge of the border of my constituency. But it's an important institution, and as I said earlier, it does continue to do the job that it was meant to do. There's a lot of support for the Land Reserve as well. The Auditor General report, there was an Auditor General report, and for those that don't know, the Auditor General is an independent officer of this legislature and reports on the effectiveness the efficiency of the use of taxpayers' money and takes a look at projects and institutions and the finances all across government to decide whether or not taxpayers' money, as I said, is being used effectively and efficiently. And the Auditor General did a report on the agricultural land reserve and the Commission in 2010. And I remember reading the report because I sat on the Public Accounts Committee for several years now. One of the observations that the Auditor General made was that, quote, recently the Commission reported that 95% of respondents to a public survey supported the agricultural land reserve and the policy of preserving agricultural land. He went on to say, preservation of agricultural land is fundamental to securing food production for future generations, particularly given the uncertain effects of climate change on our food imports and our agricultural system. And the report also points out that only 5% of the province's land base is suitable agricultural land, and much less is considered prime agricultural land. So this is, Honourable Speaker, this is a precious commodity, and it is a very serious decision to expose that precious commodity to being more easily removed from the agricultural land Commission. It is, in my submission, it is short-sighted. It's a short-sighted decision to do this, and it's a short-sighted potential sacrifice of food production and food security for future generations. And you know, Honourable Speaker, I was reading the Globe and Mail this morning, and I just happened, coincidentally, one of the stories that I read was the fact that two new groups of scientists, one of them from NASA and one of them, not sure what the other one was, were saying, here's the headline, ice sheet melt and collapse now unstoppable, scientists warn. And its story in today's Globe and Mail says the collapse of large parts of the ice sheet in West Antarctica appears to have begun and is almost certainly unstoppable. With global warming accelerating the pace of the melting, two groups of scientists has reported Monday. And this is really happening, said Thomas Wagner, who runs NASA's programs on polar ice and helped oversee some of the research. There's nothing to stop it now, but you are still limited by the physics of how fast the ice can flow. And the story also points out, whatever the mix of causes, they appear to have triggered a retreat of the ice sheet that can no longer be stopped, even if the factors drawing in the warmer water were to reverse suddenly, the scientists said. So these are the realities. These are the realities. We have the ice sheet of the Antarctic. More scientists are saying that it has started to melt and that it may be, no matter what we do, impossible to reverse that. At the same time, we know that California is experiencing record-setting droughts. California, which has been basically the food production center, certainly serving British Columbia, serving the West Coast, and much of the whole of the North America. And so we have evidence, irrefutable evidence, that we do have climate change. We have serious disruption to food production in California, and that should be a sign. That should be a sign for all of us that we have to think very seriously before we do anything that makes it harder for us to protect, that we do anything that makes it easier to remove farmland from production. And you know, even the Liberals a few years ago were speaking language that made it sound like they were concerned, very concerned about local production and about farmlands. Here's a quote from the BC Liberal campaign, Eat BC. And I remember this, the vegetables and fruits in the schools, and that was all part of Eat BC. A provincial campaign to promote local food explains, and this is a government press release. By supporting local growers and suppliers, you help the environment, reducing your carbon footprint by limiting the amount of shipping and fuel consumption needed to get the seasonal foods to you. The more local food we consume, the higher the demand, which equals the more farmers that are needed to supply the products, and voila, a healthier local economy, more local jobs within agriculture, and a stronger, more vibrant local food system. BC Food and Beverages. Fresher, faster, it's fresh, local, and tasty. Eat BC. It's a BC government press release from just a few years ago. And yet, here we have the same government which is overseeing the dismantling of the agricultural land reserve. You know, and the Agricultural Land Commission has been doing a good job. There have been times when it's been a government priority. There have been times when decisions have been made to remove land, and that's appropriate. It's appropriate if we all have the confidence that the mechanism, that the way that is being done is transparent and fair and open. There are times when it has made sense, and you know, we've talked, people have talked in this House, members have talked in this House about times that there have been exclusions that are appropriate exclusions. But again, it has to be done. It has to be done in a way that people believe are fair, and it has to be done by an independent ALR. The ALR needs to be independent, and this bill, Mr. Speaker, is no longer ensuring that we are going to have independence in those decisions. In fact, by having political appointments and local panels making the decision, we are going in the other direction. And I think overall, the Agricultural Land Commission has been reasonably balanced. The Auditor General's report that I mentioned before has acknowledged that there needed to be improvements. And the Agricultural Land Commission accepted, acknowledged, and welcomed the suggestions for improvement. And Honourable Speaker, some of those improvements, if I can find them, some of the improvements, they were talking about things like doing a better job of mapping, having a better understanding of what the boundaries, and making sure that much work was done, and also promoting agriculture. And the reason why they have not been able to do those things over the last several years, unfortunately, is a funding issue. There's a funding issue. The budget for the agricultural land reserve has been consistently cut. And I look back at the Auditor General's report again. The budget in 2002-2003 of the Agricultural Land Commission was almost $3 million, $2.93 million. And as the Auditor General points out, since that time the budget has decreased. And this is up to 2010. There was an increase more recently. The Commission's most recent detailed budget submissions in November 2008 estimated that with the 2008-9 budget, it was operating approximately 20% or $530,000 below its minimal requirements to maintain its core business. If you take a look at the Auditor General's report and also the review that was done by the Agricultural Land Commission, Richard Bullock, headed up by Richard Bullock, over and over again, the response indicates, the Auditor General indicates, and the response from the ALC indicates that the problem was with the starving of the funding. So, I mean, I don't know if this was what the plan was by the Liberal government. It looks to me like there was an intentional starving of the ALC to make it less effective. It's an old political ploy, is you take away the supports for a good public service, you starve it, then it doesn't become effective, and then you say, well, we'll have to get rid of it. And that is what is happening in this case. So I'm not surprised with the cuts to the ALC, because it gets in the way. It gets in the way of Liberal plans to dismantle the ALC. So over and over again, for example, The commission has carried out preliminary estimates of the resources and necessary funding in order to respond to the recommendations that the Auditor General made. The Commission appreciates that the audit recognizes the Commission's concerns about not being positioned to significantly enhance its efforts without the necessary resources and tools. So that report, and there's 7 or 8, 9 or 10 references to lack of funding being a fundamental problem with the agricultural land reserve. The Auditor General recognized it, and certainly the response from the Agricultural Land Commission to that report said very clearly that that was the issue. So the budget was, as I said, was almost $3 million 2002-2003, reduced to 2.4 million, reduced, I believe, in 2010 to 2 million. I mean, huge decrease. How can you expect to do the work not only of adequately assessing requests for removal and exclusions, but also the other work that the Agricultural Land Commission was supposed to do, which is to promote farming in British Columbia. There has been an increase. It was down as low as 2012-13 to 1.2 million. In other words, only 2/3. 10 years later, only 2/3 of what had been in 2002-2003. So of course they had struggles trying to do the work they did. Now, to the government's credit, there was an increase in 2013-14 and planned for 2014-15. And that allowed Richard Bullock, as the head of the ALC and the commission, to start to do the good work, the mapping and so on, that needed to be done. And I've got to say, I've got to give credit to Richard Bullock. Since his appointment a few years ago, he has stood up for the ALR. I think he's provided sensible leadership. And I think he's done a good job on behalf of British Columbians. So I appreciate his work. I'm going to just mention and the work of the commission, the good people at the commission. As well as the Auditor General's report, we had a report a review done by the Agricultural Land Commission itself, taking a look at itself, and they again made it very clear that the problem is with funding. The recommendation is that they needed to have sufficient funding and resources for compliance and enforcement, to fully implement its online application tracking system. There was many recommendations, but many of them said really essentially the biggest problem is funding. I mean, that's unfortunate. Not possible. I want to talk for a second. I guess what I want to do is I want to sum up. This is a move that has happened without consultation. Apparently, the core review was supposed to be, and the Ministry of Finance, the member from Vancouver Kensington, found out with surprise that the Finance Committee meetings were actually the core review hearings, and nobody was apparently aware of it. And that's where people were supposed to be making submissions on the future of the Agricultural Land Commission and the Agricultural Land Reserve. So there has been no consultation, very little consultation. Consultation was promised after the present minister was appointed, was made the Minister of Agriculture. That was one day. We were going to change the bill. We were going to listen. But in fact, what has happened is that there has been no consultation. There's been reading of emails. The people of British Columbia are very concerned about this. I was hoping to get a chance to get to some of the people in my community who have expressed concern. The City Council had passed a motion a month ago condemning Bill 24 and what it is going to do to farmland in British Columbia. The Lower Mainland Local Governments Association has very recently, as have other local government associations, passed motions condemning Bill 24. We are getting thousands of emails. I'm hearing from my constituents. There have been individuals There have been academics, soil scientists, there have been people all over this province have expressed great concern about this bill, which is going to dismantle. And I want to finally say, Honourable Speaker, that the answer instead is something positive, like the member from Vancouver Kingsway who has brought a very thoughtful BC Local Food Act to this legislature, and that is worthy of support.